So my name is CJ Debarra. I am a journalist and an author and a queer historian as well. I founded the Notts Queer History Archive about 3 years ago. It was meant to be an oral history project. It still kind of is. It spans 162 interviews with people from 1960 to 2019. And that's everybody ranging from 18 to 93. The furthest interview that I've done, over Zoom I might add, was Bali and Thailand. That has now created its own archive of not just the transcripts, but there's 2 books coming out in next year. And there are also objects and items and loads of things that people have donated, along with a full media kind of newspapers and magazines and all the rest of it. That's another side to it as well, where there's hundreds and hundreds of articles in there.
Is it funded? Have you funded it? Is there payment from somewhere?
No funding, no payment, no sponsorship, nothing. It is literally something I started 3 years ago, kind of thinking it wouldn't be a big thing. And it has slowly become literally everything I do in my spare time. I'm now researching queer lives from 1860 to 1960. So I've spent all day today researching the Second World War and queer people's experiences within that time frame. And because I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 10, and that has impacted me a lot when it comes to applying for funding and sponsorship and all the rest of it. And also, you know, I'm constantly working on this when I'm not working. So my time and my mental capacity for going over forms and applying for funding and reaching out to people it's basically at zero. So I do all of this, every coffee, every tea, photocopy, you know, archive photograph that I've had to pay for is out of my own wages. And there's goods and bad to that. On the one hand, it would be really nice to have some funding that I could make documentaries or podcasts or things like that. But then on the other hand, I don't have to mention in my book, and thanks to so-and-so, you know, for sponsoring all of this. So it's a nice balance, but yeah, I do wish I had a bit of funding. I moved to Nottingham about 10 years ago, did the usual thing of coming here to study, told my mum I'd be back within a year, still here. And I've never left. And for some reason, I've picked up all of this wonderful and become completely immersed in all this wonderful history.
I love it.
I've met my partner here. We've bought a house here. We're very, very settled. But I think people are initially, when they meet me, they're like, wait a minute, because you assume that somebody who's doing all this history work must be from the place. But actually, I have kind of like a clean slate with the city. So I'm not biased in terms of like, this is what happened in, you know, I don't have those like long-standing historical biases or like, I don't know the politics. I'm not involved. I have no skin in the game whatsoever. So I can write objectively to a point, but I can write as objectively as I can, basically. A question I get asked all the time, outside of like, where's your accent from, because it's not Nottingham, is, well, are you queer? Are you like, what's your connection to this? So most people feel a lot more comfortable knowing that they're speaking to somebody who's also LGBT. So I'm a queer lesbian, non-binary lesbian, I might add. So my pronouns are they, them. I think along those lines, people are very surprised about me not coming from Nottingham thing as well, because, well, why? But when they have the conversations with me about all of this, they realise that I have the knowledge, I have the background, I've done the research, I've been doing this for 3 years. I eat, sleep and breathe this and Nottingham's history. So even though I didn't grow up here, even though this is not my hometown, I can still pull out the weirdest facts about this town from like the 1854 or something like that most locals know. And I've worked in local news since 2017. for Nottingham Post, Nottingham World and Left Line. And I've done stuff with NottsTV on occasion as well. So doing all of those meant getting a really big crash course in learning about Nottingham and about all the different areas and who likes who and who doesn't speak to who, and you know, the good, the bad, and all the in between.
What does the decriminalisation of homosexuality mean to you?
For me, the decriminalisation was very much a step. I don't want to call it a total and complete and utter, you know, because it was partial. There were still so many areas of it that needed work, but it was enough of a step that it did a lot for the community, but it sort of gave people a little bit of momentum, and it also gave people a very big push to start creating things like CHE, or the Campaign for Homosexual Equality, existed at this point anyway. But at that point, after 67, you start to see more local branches in different cities outside of London and Manchester pick up CHE branches. You had the Gay Liberation Front start in the very early 70s as well. And that all comes from, well, we've got a little bit of this sort of freedom, but we haven't got everything. There's still major areas where we're being discriminated against that aren't, like, you know, there's so many different parts to it. And also there's still a lot of stigma around as well. You know, just because the law changed, society had to change with it. And that took a hell of a lot longer to get through. The immediate positive impact, it's kind of a blessing and a curse, right? Because on the one hand, it is pushing the issues that gay people are facing into the press, into the media. It's talking about the blackmail that gay men were facing, because, you know, there were people who literally went to the toilets and would wait for gay men to come out if they were cruising or cottaging, you know, and would blackmail them. And, you know, part of the reason that you had the legalisation was to stop things like that from happening. Because basically, are you going to call the police if you're being blackmailed? Because you then become the person who's under investigation. And not only that, but they will go through your little black book. They will interrogate you about everybody you know. So you wouldn't invite that into your life. So often gay men just endured it. And I've seen diary entries and letters from men in Nottingham who have had that experience. There's one in particular. It's a letter from one man to another, and it's, I want to say, mid-30s. And he's talking about, we went to a venue and my blackmailer was there. He literally calls him my blackmailer. He talks about, you know, how infuriating it is, the fact that this guy is like basically being really nice to all of his friends, and he can't do anything. He can't say anything. He has to keep the kind of pretense of it all going. And yeah, so in one respect, the everything being in the press as a result of the law change is a good thing, because people are going, well, actually, the government shouldn't have a right to tell people what they do in their own bedrooms or who they love or all the rest of it. And they start to see it from our perspective a little bit more. The curse side of that then is that there's more attention on what LGBT people are doing. There's more scrutiny. The police actually step up a little bit more as well. So there's goods and bad to everything, but I think certainly that would be one of the positives. The thing is as well, though, you will still have blackmail, because there's still the stigma. There's still like men who have sex with men who are married, all of this. So there's still a lot to play for, but it doesn't give the police the right to come into your home and demand that you hand over your address books and go through your love life, basically. We see a lot of cases within Nottingham, even like in the run up to the law change in 67, that reflect the level that police were going to in order to crack down on gay men. It was a huge positive, but there was still so much work that needed to be done afterwards. When I called it a step, it's very much the same way that civil partnership was a step, because it wasn't full marriage. And I know there's a lot of people for whom that's not the right thing, but on the scale of things, if you look at the wider picture, it was half the rights, not all the rights. And I kind of see the 67 partial decriminalisation, I mean, the fact that I say partial instead of decriminalisation, I see it the same way. Some of the rights, not all of the rights. And therefore, if you're in that set of circumstances, you keep going. I think for so many people that weren't within the community, they didn't realise all the other stuff that came along with it. They weren't your average person who's straight, married, whatever, doesn't have any contact with LGBT people, probably doesn't realise that there's the thing about the armed forces, there's the thing about the privacy in your own home, there's, you know, the age of consent, all of this stuff. On the face of it, to them, 67 feels like this complete and utter change where, oh, it's all the freedoms, all of the things, fine. Why are people still protesting, complaining, asking for their rights? We gave them decriminalisation. What more do they want? But actually, no. That's why it was so important that we kept going. Before 1967, it was a lot more secretive because it had to be. There were no gay bars in what we recognise them like today. No flags, no like... Ironically, there were drag queens. Very different experience of what we have today. And you had to know where to go. And you had to be very careful about where you went. A lot of my interviews where people talked about the early days of the 60s and the 70s, the fear of being seen to go into a venue. So many people spoke about circling the block, where they'd do a couple of laps to make sure no one was watching, and then they would go into the Flying Horse. And it's funny because people were still doing that in the 80s and 90s, but there's less of an illegal aspect to it. It was definitely a game of chance pre-1967. You had to know people who would tell you where to go. You had to almost like know how to pick up on the signs and the codes from other people. You might know what Polari is, for example. You might know that certain gentlemen's bars in certain hotels have like a reputation. You might hear that somebody is complaining about, oh, that's that bar where the lesbians go, and you can mentally... There's lots of different ways that people sort of met each other, but there was a lot of stigma and a lot to lose as well, because certainly a lot of gay men got married because it was the done thing and the expected thing. And certainly at the moment I'm reading a diary of somebody who was in World War II, and he knows that he's gay. He's fine with it. At one point he literally states, I have no interest in women. But yet his diaries, he's struggling with the concept of, he knows he's going to be expected to get married when he goes home. He doesn't in the end, but he feels that pressure. So for a lot of men, that's just what they did. And sometimes their wives found out and sometimes they didn't.
And I suppose sometimes they were okay with it.
Absolutely. There's people that had very, marriages of convenience. There were others that it was a lavender marriage where both parties were gay, or you had the partner would be completely supportive if the other person was trans, for example. There was a lot more to it than the traditional story that we hear is it's all awful and people get kicked out. There's so many different threads to it as well. I mean, there's one particular story that I could think of where a bisexual couple used to go to the Flying Horse when it was not a shopping centre, I should add, and it was a bar at the time, or one of the rooms had a reputation, quote unquote, and they would go there together to pick up men. So there's always been queer people, and there's always been queer venues. Certainly, pre-67 people had so much to deal with that unfortunately we're still kind of dealing with today. We still have countries where it's illegal. We still have stigma. We still have violence. We've seen increases in people being attacked within the last year in Nottingham. We've had cases that you can read about in the news. While we have made great strides forward, we're not 100% removed from the previous experiences. People do not understand that it's not just because we've got certain things in place now, it doesn't mean that we're not going to round the corner on a night out and find, I got attacked the end of last year, actually, and that's my first time ever being physically attacked. I was fine, thankfully, but it was about 2 or 3 weeks before that poor guy got attacked outside the New Foresters. And that was my first time ever having any physical violence towards me. I've had loads of verbal, name calling and all the rest of it, but that horrified me in so many ways. And it made me really frightened to leave the house. Yet I can still get married, which is not to knock, because I actually am getting married.